September 7th, 1971, 1:23 a.m., Smalls, Paradise, 135th Street, Harlem. Nicky Barnes walked through the front door wearing a $25,000 chinchilla coat, a $50,000 Rolex, and a smile that said he owned everything he looked at. 12 bodyguards, 3 women, enough jewelry to blind a man. He walked straight to the back of the club where Frank Lucas sat alone, nursing a glass of water. No bodyguards, no entourage, just Frank. Nicky pulled out a chair without asking, sat down, looked Frank dead in the eyes, and said 7 words that would have gotten any other man in Harlem killed before sunrise. "This city ain't big enough for both of us." Frank Lucas didn't blink, didn't move, just let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he smiled. What happened in the next 30 minutes would determine who really ran Harlem, and only one of them would walk away with the crown to understand what happened that night. You need to understand who these 2 men were. By 1971, Harlem had 2 kings, 2 empires, 2 completely different philosophies on how to run the drug trade. Frank Lucas was the ghost, the invisible man. He dressed like an accountant, drove ordinary cars, lived in a suburban mansion in Teaneck, New Jersey, where his neighbors thought he was a businessman, which in a way he was. Frank had built his empire on one principle: stay invisible, don't flash, don't brag, don't give the cops or the feds a reason to look at you twice. He controlled the heroin trade through blue magic, the purest product on the streets, 98% pure, half the price of anything else. His customers were loyal because his product was superior. His operation was family only, brothers, cousins, country boys from North Carolina who would die before they talked. Frank Lucas made $1 million a day, and nobody outside of Harlem even knew his name. Nicky Barnes was the opposite. Mr. Untouchable. That's what they called him. That's what he called himself. Nicky wanted everyone to know his name. He wore custom suits from Italy, drove Maseratis and Rolls Royces, threw parties that cost more than most people made in a year. He had a penthouse on the Upper West Side and a closet full of fur coats. Nicky had organized the black dealers of Harlem into the council, 7 bosses who controlled territories. Like a corporate board, he was the chairman, the face, the brand. Where Frank whispered, Nicky shouted. Where Frank hid, Nicky posed for photographs. Where Frank counted money in silence, Nicky counted it in nightclubs surrounded by women and champagne. 2 different men, 2 different empires. And by September 1971, their territories had started to overlap. The trouble started with a block, 142nd Street, between Lenox and 7th. Neutral territory, or at least it had been. One of Nicky's council members, a man named Ishmael Muhammad, had started pushing product on that block. Blue Magic customers started disappearing, not dying, just switching, buying Nicky's product instead. The street said Ishmael was offering credit, fronting product to junkies who couldn't pay up front. It was bad business. Junkies never paid back, but it was stealing Frank's customers. And Frank Lucas didn't tolerate theft. He sent a message through channels, polite, professional. The block belongs to no one. Pull your people back. The message came back from Nicky himself, not through channels, directly. Tell Frank Lucas if he wants that block, he can come talk to me himself. I'll be at Smalls Paradise on Saturday. It was a challenge, a public challenge, and in Harlem, you didn't ignore public challenges. Not if you wanted to keep your crown. Frank spent 3 days thinking about that meeting. He knew what Nicky wanted: a confrontation, drama, headlines. Nicky fed on attention the way junkies fed on heroin. He wanted Frank to show up with soldiers. Wanted a scene that would make him look like the man who stood up to the ghost of Harlem. Wanted to turn one disputed block into a war that would put his name in every newspaper in New York. Frank understood the game. He'd been playing it longer than Nicky had been alive. Bumpy Johnson had taught him, never give your enemy what they want. Never fight on their terms. Never let them choose the battlefield. So Frank made a decision. He would go to Smalls Paradise alone. No soldiers, no guns, no entourage. Just Frank Lucas in a simple suit, ready to have a conversation. It was either the smartest move of his career or the last mistake he'd ever make. Smalls Paradise was packed that Saturday night. Word had spread. Everybody knew Nicky Barnes had called out Frank Lucas. Everybody wanted to see what would happen. The club was neutral ground, owned by basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain. Now, after the original small had passed, but neutral ground meant nothing when two kings went to war. Frank arrived at 12:45 a.m., walked in alone. The crowd parted for him like he was Moses at the Red Sea. He walked to his usual table in the back corner. The table that gave him a view of every entrance and exit. The table that put his back to the wall. He ordered a glass of water, and he waited. The whole club watched, whispered, wondered. Where were Frank's people? Where were his soldiers? Had the ghost of Harlem lost his nerve? Or was this something else? Nicky made his entrance 38 minutes later. He wanted Frank to wait. Wanted the anticipation to build. Wanted everyone to see who controlled the clock. He came through the front door like a king entering his throne room. The chinchilla coat, the Rolex catching every light in the room, the 12 bodyguards forming a wall of muscle around him. 3 women trailing behind, dressed like they were going to the Oscars. Nicky stopped in the middle of the dance floor. Let everyone look. Let the cameras and people's eyes capture the image. Then he walked toward Frank's table. The crowd held its breath. The music kept playing James Brown, Hot Pants, but nobody was dancing anymore. Everyone was watching the 2 most powerful black men in America about to collide. Nicky sat down without asking. His bodyguards spread out around the table. Not threatening, not yet, just present. A reminder of force. Frank didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge them, just kept his eyes on Nicky. That quiet, patient stare that had made men confess to things they hadn't done. Nicky smiled, all teeth. Frank Lucas, the invisible man, finally decided to show his face. Frank took a sip of water, said nothing. Nicky leaned back, spread his arms across the back of the booth like he owned it. You know why I wanted to meet? Because I've been hearing things. Hearing that Frank Lucas thinks he runs Harlem. Hearing that Frank Lucas thinks he's untouchable. He laughed at his own word. That's my name, brother, Untouchable. You can't take that from me. Frank set down his glass. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The whole table had to lean in to hear him. I don't want your name. I don't want your spotlight. I don't want your women or your cars or your magazine covers. I just want what's mine. Nicky's smile flickered. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Frank was supposed to be intimidated, defensive, trying to negotiate. Instead, he sat there like a man who'd already won. What's yours? Nicky repeated. What exactly is yours, Frank? Because from where I'm sitting, everything in Harlem belongs to the man with the most soldiers, the most product, the most power. And that man is me. Frank shook his head slowly. No, that man is the one who can disappear tomorrow and still be making money next year. You can't disappear, Nicky. You need to be seen. You need the attention. That's your weakness. And weaknesses get exploited. The words hung in the air. Nicky's bodyguards shifted, hands moving toward waistbands. But Nicky raised a finger, stopped them. He was smart enough to know that killing Frank Lucas in the middle of Small's paradise would bring down heat that even he couldn't handle. Besides, he wanted to win this conversation. Wanted to walk away looking like the bigger man. You think you're better than me? Nicky asked. Voice harder now, less showman, more gangster. You think because you hide in New Jersey and dress like a damn accountant, that makes you smart. I built the council. I organized this whole game. I made us legitimate. While you were driving Bumpy Johnson around like a chauffeur, I was building an empire. Frank nodded. You built something. I'll give you that. But you built it loud. And loud doesn't last. Nicky slammed his palm on the table. The glasses jumped. The whole club flinched. Loud doesn't last. I've been on the cover of the New York Times magazine. They called me Mr. Untouchable because nobody can touch me. The feds have been trying for years. Nothing sticks. I'm bulletproof, Frank. Can you say the same? Frank didn't flinch at the outburst, just watched Nicky with those patient eyes. The New York Times, he repeated. You proud of that? You put your face on the cover of a magazine that goes to every FBI office in the country, every D-desk, every prosecutor's breakfast table. You handed them your photograph and said, come get me. You think that's smart? You think that's untouchable? That's suicide on a payment plan. Nicky's jaw tightened. For the first time, a crack in that golden smile. Frank had found the nerve. Frank leaned forward, still quiet, still calm. but something had shifted in his eyes, something cold. Let me tell you something about power, Nicky. Real power doesn't need to be seen. Real power doesn't need a Rolex or a chinchilla coat. Real power is being able to walk away from this table right now and know that my money keeps flowing, my product keeps moving, my family stays safe. You can't walk away. You need this, the spotlight, the recognition, the women looking at you, the men fearing you. You're addicted to it, and addiction is weakness. He paused. Let that sink in. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. And Nicky, you haven't stopped talking since you sat down. The table went silent. Nicky's bodyguards were stone. The three women looked confused. This wasn't the show they'd signed up for. Around the club, whispers spread like fire. People couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see Nicky's face. Could see the golden boy of Harlem looking like he'd been slapped. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Nicky laughed. But it wasn't the same laugh. It was harder, more brittle. You talk a lot of philosophy for a country boy. But we came here to settle business. The block, 142nd Street, my people stay. Your people can find somewhere else. Frank shook his head. Your people leave. Tonight or tomorrow morning. Every cop in Harlem who's on my payroll starts asking questions about council business. Every politician who owes me favors starts making phone calls. Every distributor who buys from both of us has to choose. And they'll choose Blue Magic, because Blue Magic is better. Because I'm better. Nicky's eyes went wide. You threatening me? You're gonna sit here, alone, no backup, and threaten me? Frank's voice dropped even lower. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining the situation. You wanted a war. You called me out. You thought I'd come in here with soldiers, and you'd have more soldiers, and then we'd negotiate from strength. But I didn't bring soldiers. You know why? Because I don't need them. My power isn't in the men standing behind me. It's in the relationships I've built, the systems I've created, the infrastructure that runs whether I'm in this club or on a beach in Puerto Rico. You need those 12 men to feel safe. I just need this. He tapped his temple. That's the difference between us, Nicky. That's why I'll still be here when you're gone. Something changed in Nicky's face. Not defeat. He was too proud for that. But something close to recognition. He was seeing Frank Lucas clearly for the first time. Not the ghost. Not the invisible man. But the machine, the calculator. The cold, relentless intelligence that had built an empire without leaving fingerprints. 142nd Street, Nicky said finally, voice flat now. No more showman. That's really what this is about. 1 block? Frank nodded. 1 block. Your man Ishmael pulls back. We go back to how it was. Separate territories. Separate businesses. No overlap. No competition. You do your thing, I do mine. Harlem's big enough for 2 kings. But only if those kings respect boundaries. Nicky stared at him for a long moment. The whole club was watching. Whatever he said next would be the story that spread through every corner of New York by morning. Nicky Barnes stood up, adjusted his chinchilla coat, looked down at Frank Lucas, still sitting there with his glass of water. You know what, Frank? You might be the smartest man I ever met. Or the craziest. Haven't decided which. He smiled, smaller now, more genuine. Ishmael pulls back. 142nd Street goes back to neutral. But this ain't over. One day, you and me, we're gonna finish this conversation. Frank nodded. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight, we're businessmen. And businessmen know when a deal makes sense. Nicky laughed. A real laugh this time. Businessmen. Yeah, that's what we are. He turned to his entourage, snapped his fingers. They started walking toward the door, then stopped. Looked back. Hey Frank, that thing you said. About the loudest one in the room. That's good. I might have to steal that. Frank's voice followed him. You can have it? Words are free. Nicky Barnes walked out of Small's paradise. With his 12 bodyguards and his 3 women and his $25,000 coat. He walked out looking like a king. But everyone in that club knew what had really happened. Frank Lucas alone had made Mr. Untouchable back down. Not with guns. Not with soldiers. Not with threats of violence. With words, with logic, with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome and knew he would win them all. The whispers started before the door closed, By morning, every corner in Harlem knew the story. Frank Lucas faced down Nicky Barnes. Alone, unarmed, and Nicky blinked. The block went back to neutral. Ismail Mohammed pulled his people out before sunrise, and for the next 4 years, the two kingdoms of Harlem coexisted in an uneasy peace. To kings, two empires, one city that belonged to both and neither. The story spread beyond Harlem, to Brooklyn, to the Bronx, to Philadelphia, and Detroit and Chicago. The country boy who'd told the Italian mob no, who'd built an invisible empire on pure product and family loyalty, who'd faced down the loudest man in Harlem and won without raising his voice. Frank Lucas became legend not because of what he did, but because of how he did it. No flash, no ego, no wasted motion. Just the cold, clean efficiency of a man who understood that business was business and everything else was just noise. Nicky Barnes kept being Nicky Barnes. Magazine covers, parties, the spotlight he couldn't live without. And in 1978, that spotlight caught up with him. Life sentence. Mr. Untouchable finally touched. Frank had been right. Loud doesn't last. Years later, after both empires had crumbled, after both men had faced justice and paid their prices, people still talked about that night at Small's Paradise. The night two kings sat across from each other and one of them blinked. Frank never talked about it much. That wasn't his way. But when asked, he just shrugged. Nicky was good at being seen. I was good at not being seen. Different skills for different games. He wanted to be famous. I wanted to be rich. We both got what we wanted. He'd pause then. That quiet smile. But only one of us kept it. The confrontation at Small's Paradise wasn't about a block. Not really. It was about two different philosophies of power colliding in a Harlem nightclub at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. Nicky believed power came from visibility, from reputation, from making people know your name and fear it. Frank believed power came from invisibility, from systems, from making yourself so essential and so protected that the spotlight couldn't find you, even if it tried. History proved which philosophy lasted longer. But that night, in that moment, both men were kings. And for 30 minutes, Harlem held its breath to see which king would bow. The answer echoed through the streets for years. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. And Frank Lucas was never loud if this story about the night two kings faced off hit different. Smash that subscribe button. We're telling the Frank Lucas stories that American Gangster couldn't show. The confrontations, the power moves, the moments that built and destroyed empires. Drop a like if you understand why Frank Lucas won that night without throwing a single punch. And in the comments, who was smarter, the man who stayed invisible or the man who became untouchable? More Frank Lucas stories coming. The Golden Triangle deal, the military coffins, the mistake that cost him everything. Don't miss any of it.